It was a summer's evening in Sweden, somber. The sun had begun to set over the small, quiet village of Blomberg and cast golden hues over the fields. For many, it was just another Sunday. But for one girl, it would be the last day she was ever seen alive. Lisa Holm was a bright, kind-hearted 17-year-old girl who had just finished her shift at a local cafe. She sent a message to her parents, telling them she was on her way home. But she never made it. Hours passed, concern turned into fear, and soon a desperate search began. What had transpired was a situation so heartbreaking and terrifying that it rocked Sweden as a whole. A case that, even after years, still lingers in the minds of many. Lisa Holm was just like any other teenager. She had dreams, she had a future. She was warm, friendly, and deeply loved by her family and friends. No one could have imagined that an ordinary walk home would develop into one of Sweden's most tragic and startling cases. We're delving further into Lisa Holm's heartbreaking story today. The specifics of her disappearance, the frantic search that ensued, and the startling disclosure of her true fate. And most importantly, how justice, though delayed, was finally served 7 years later. But before we start, if true crime cases like this are important to you, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. It's one way of giving awareness to stories that must not be forgotten. Now, take me back to that fateful evening on June 7th, 2015. A day which should have been like any other but, in ways, became the beginning of a nightmare. It was a warm summer evening in Blomberg, Sweden. Crime was practically unheard of in this little, peaceful village. Children went home fearlessly in that type of place where residents left their doors unlocked. On Sunday, inside a small cafe, 17-year-old Lisa Holm had just finished her shift of pouring coffee and selling pastry to the locals. After such a hard day, she was eager to get home. At 6:23 p.m., Lisa sent a straightforward message to her parents. On my way home, they searched day and night, combed every road, every field, and every abandoned structure around the cafe. For days, there was no sign of Lisa. Then, on June 12th, 5 days after Lisa went missing, the search led investigators to an old, abandoned barn, just a short distance from the cafe where she had worked. Inside, they found what they had feared the most. Hidden away in the shadows was Lisa Holm's body. The details of the crime scene were very disturbing. There was an evident sign of violence on the body of Lisa, and almost immediately it was confirmed by the investigators that she was really murdered. The discovery sent shockwaves across Sweden. People who had followed the case, praying for her safe return, were now met with devastating news. Strangers wept. Parents hugged their children a little closer that night. Sweden was in mourning. But one question: who could do this? Why? As police examined this evidence, it wasn't some kind of senseless act of violence. Somebody had planned this out. Somebody in Blomberg knew what had happened to Lisa Holm, and soon the truth would be revealed. Minutes turned into hours. The sun went down and Lisa's parents started to get worried. This was not like her. She's responsible, on time, calls to check in. They tried calling her phone, but nothing. At first, they thought maybe she had lost track of time. Maybe she was stopping to chat with a friend. But deep down, a sinking feeling began to creep in. By 10 p.m., their concern had turned to full-blown panic. Lisa wasn't answering. No one had seen her. And worst of all, her scooter, the one she had planned on using to get home, was still parked right outside the cafe. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. By midnight, the police were called, and an official search began. Officers, volunteers, and even strangers who had heard the news gathered, combing through the village, calling out Lisa's name. They searched the roads, the fields, the lake nearby, everywhere. but there was no sign of Lisa. As the hours passed, fear gripped the town. Something terrible had happened, and soon, the horrifying truth would come to light. What happened to Lisa Holm, and who was responsible for her disappearance? The answers were darker than anyone could have imagined. The search for Lisa Holm became one of the largest missing person operations in Sweden's recent history. Volunteers, police officers, and even strangers who had never met Lisa joined the desperate hunt to find her. Day and night they searched. They scoured every road, every field, every abandoned structure near the cafe. But for days, there was no sign of Lisa. Then, on June 12th, 5 days after Lisa went missing, the search led investigators to an old abandoned barn, just a short distance from the cafe where she had worked. Inside, they found what they had feared the most. Hidden away in the shadows was Lisa Holm's body. The details that came to light concerning the crime scene were shocking. There were obvious marks of violence on Lisa's body. Investigators soon confirmed that she indeed had been murdered. Lisa Holm's murder shocked Sweden, but investigators were determined to find who was behind the crime. And soon they did. Authorities began to piece together a timeline. They analyzed CCTV footage, checked phone records, and spoke with potential witnesses. Then, one name started to surface. A 35-year-old worker from Lithuania who had been living and working nearby. This man, a laborer working in the area, had no prior connection to Lisa. But forensic evidence would soon link him to her murder. Inside the barn where Lisa was found, investigators found tiny fibers on her clothing. Those fibers matched materials from the suspect's workplace and living quarters. Then came the most damning piece of evidence: DNA. A forensic sweep uncovered traces of the suspect's DNA near Lisa's body, as well as on objects found at the crime scene. With mounting evidence, Swedish authorities arrested the 35-year-old worker. But when they questioned him, he refused to admit any involvement. For hours, detectives pressed him for answers. He denied everything. He claimed he had no idea what had happened to Lisa. But the evidence spoke louder than his words. The trial. Prosecutors laid out an overwhelming case: the fibers, the DNA, and even phone records showing his movements on the night of Lisa's disappearance. It was inescapable. The court found him guilty. Justice had been served, but for Lisa's family, no punishment could undo the tragedy they had suffered. Lisa Holm was only 17, a young lady with dreams and future as bright as morning sun, and yet even justice served will her loss throb. The evidence against the 35-year-old suspect had been overwhelming. The Swedish prosecutors didn't wait any longer, immediately presenting this damaging evidence to the court. Fibers, DNA, records of telephone calls, everything indicated one person. The prosecution insisted that Lisa Holm was abducted, brought into the barn, and then killed. The prosecutor painted an unsettling picture of what they say occurred that evening night. But the defense pushed back. They claimed the evidence was circumstantial, that the police had rushed to judgment. The accused maintained his innocence, never confessing, not even once. After weeks of deliberation, the court reached its decision: guilty, life imprisonment. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Justice had been served, or had it? While many felt relieved, others wondered whether the sentence was enough. There were some arguments that the suspect had not acted alone, and the deeper layers in this case were yet to be unraveled. Even today, the case of Lisa Holm still haunts Sweden. It is a constant reminder that one night can change everything, and justice, though served, can never really heal the wounds of loss. Years have gone by since the tragic death of Lisa Holm. But even after sentencing, the courts continued to hear arguments. Appeals were filed, doubts were raised. Some felt the sentence wasn't enough. Others didn't feel justice had really been served to all involved. Finally, the highest Swedish courts were in agreement on the sentence. The man guilty of Lisa's death would be jailed. The law, at least, had been satisfied. But to Lisa's family, the pain never went away. They still remember the bright, kind young girl whose life was stolen too soon. She is still remembered in Blomberg today so that she would never be forgotten. Her case also left an indelible mark on Sweden. The police enhanced safety in rural areas. More cameras, quicker response times, and more advanced forensic techniques were implemented in hopes that this would never happen again. Lisa Holm's story is one of tragedy, but also one of resilience. It is to remind one that one case can change the course of a nation, one loss that unites behind the same aspiration for justice and safety. And for the last time, Lisa's story will never be forgotten. As we remember Lisa, so do we remember that justice, safety, and our standing together must be there for protection when someone needs it most. Lisa Holm's life was cut short. A young lady with hopes, a family that loves her, and a promise of a future ahead of her, gone in the blink of an eye due to the lack of respect for life. But while her story is one of tragedy, her memory will live on. Her case shook Sweden to its core. It changed the way crimes are investigated, how rural communities approach safety, and how justice is pursued. While no verdict can bring Lisa back, her story remains a powerful reminder that justice must never rest, and that no victim should ever be forgotten. Cases like Lisa's should not just be headlines. They are to remind us of the important things in life: awareness, safety, and justice. For a victim deserves to be heard, and any story, even the most tragic, is worth telling. What are your thoughts on Lisa Holm's case? Do you believe she got justice? Leave it in the comment section below and hit that like and subscribe button for more videos like this.